Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Sadashivasamārambhām Shankaracharya Madhyamām Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Prano Devi Saraswati Vaje Birvajinivati Enama Vitravatu Ano Divo Brahata Parvatata Saraswati Yajata Gantu Yagyam Havan Devi Jujushana Dhrutachi Shagman No Vacha Vishati Shrunotu Shri Vagdevyai Namaha Madguru Shri Shankaracharya Namaha Hari Om. The topic for today's session is Moksha. A topic of great importance because every individual in this world, every ordinary individual, every sadhaka, every bhakta, all of us are looking at moksha as the main objective in our life. At least in the Hindu philosophy, where we have these two clear-cut distinctions of pravritti and nivritti dharma. In the nivritti dharma, moksha is the most important and the greatest objective. It is called nishreyasa. Obviously, the topic is of great importance, and also there will be very strong objections as well to this point when we talk about whether this moksha is real or unreal. There are many questions about moksha, of course. People ask about when do we get moksha, how do we get moksha, but at a deeper philosophical and academic level, of course, the question is the moksha real? Moksha, salvation, liberation, whatever we call it, is it real? Does something happen to us? Do we go somewhere? Paramgatim, as they say in the Upanishads and the Gita. What is that paramgatim? What is that state? What is that place? There is no place. Paramgatim is a state where the bhakta or the jigyasu or the jnani reaches. Since the deeper question happens to be whether the moksha is real, this creates a lot of disturbance on the minds of the other philosophers, and there will be very, very strong objections also. The background for this topic is actually the second verse of the chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita appears in the third part. If you divide Bhagavad Gita into three parts, the third, the last part from the chapter 13 to chapter 18 is dealing with the reality, that. The 13th chapter being the very first chapter in this section, very important section and very important chapter as well. And the most important, as far as I can think of, is the second verse, wherein the second point, the second verse and the second line of the second verse, Bhagavan says, Kshetrajnam Chaapi Vidhi Sarva Kshetreshu Bharata. Kshetrajnam Chaapi Vidhi Sarva Kshetreshu Bharata. He is addressing Arjuna. Arjuna, I am there in every kshetra, every field. It is me who is there in every field, which means the field here is the body, every individual and their body, their mind, etc. I am there in every kshetra, and I am the kshetrajna there. Now, this is the central philosophy of the Upanishads, of course, and it is a Mahavakya, the great saying of the Upanishads. There are hundreds of Mahavakyas coming from the Upanishads, and even in Gita we have various Upanishadic statements like this Mahavakya, And this one is probably the most important verse in the entire Bhagavad Gita. This is the central essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita itself is the essence of all the Upanishads. And this statement by the Lord is the most important aspect of the Vedanta, Uttaramimamsa. When the Lord says, "It is me who is there in every field," we have an opponent coming up and asking questions, challenging this statement. Shankaracharya generally doesn't miss such opportunities. And his style of operation is to have an opponent, imaginary opponent, asking questions, and he would reply to those questions or objections and clarify his point. Thus, in this verse, when the Lord says, "I am there in every field, every body, every individual," he is indicating a very, very profound philosophical point, which is the Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. When he says, "I am there in every field," it is the Paramatma says that I am there in every Jivatma, which means every Jivatma is a Paramatma too. This will, of course, obviously rattle up the opponent. We call him pUrvapakshi. pUrvapakshi immediately raises an objection, saying, "Oh, if Paramatma is there in every Jivatma, Paramatma becomes a samsari, because Jivatma are all samsaris. They are in this world, they are dealing with the world, they are facing all the problems and ills of this world, and they are deep into samsara. The samsara is the mundane existence of people struggling, going through pains and pressures, resulting in the birth and death cycle for eternity." He says, Paramatma then is there in every Jivatma, and he is a samsari because Jivatma is a samsari. Now, also accordingly, he says, Jivatma also then is the Paramatma, and he is an asamsari because Paramatma is asamsari. He is above samsara. And if every Jivatma is a Paramatma, there is a problem. These two aspects that I pointed out are untenable. Etat anupapannam. Because if every Jivatma is a Paramatma, then there is a problem of Samsara abhava prasanga. There is absence of samsara. Also, this results in the Sastras being useless, they being futile. Sastra anarthakya dosham, Sastra vayartaka dosham. So Sastras become useless because the Jivatma are all already Paramatma. Then there is no need for the Shastras because Shastras deal with the upliftment of the individual, of the Jivatma. Jivatma goes through the Shastras, goes through them, understands them, gets the knowledge from the Shastras, practices the tenets, the dictates and the strictures of the Shastras, and then reaches the higher level of knowledge and then the final emancipation. So they become useless. Shankaracharya answers this objection very coolly, very calmly. He says, Shastras can never be useless. They are useless only for jnanis, people who are already realized, who have known what they are, what the reality is, or as stated above, that they are themselves the Paramatma. Jiva Paramatma Aikyam is known to them, which is what we are dealing with right now. In fact, in this discussion, we will deal with 2 points very clearly. One is establishing Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. Secondly, answering this objection, which is the resultant point from the Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. Shastra Anarthakya Dosham will also be answered by the Acharya. Here Acharya now says it is useless only for the jnanis. They don't require scriptures. But there are two types of people in this world. The ajnanis and the jnanis. Not everybody is a jnani. In fact, the majority are ajnanis. Earlier in the 6th chapter, Bhagavan calls these two sets of people as Yoga Ruda and Aruruksha. Yoga Ruda is someone who is adept in yoga, who is fully into yoga, and he is already a jnani. Aruruksha is somebody who is putting an effort to achieve this yoga. Of course, earlier in this chapter 2 also he describes in greater detail this jnani. He calls him, in the 2nd chapter, we have a very, very long session dealing with Sthita Prajna Lakshanam. He calls him a Sthita Prajna, stable-minded jnani, whose mind is stable. Not just the mind, a mind which is full of knowledge, which is ripened with knowledge, and that knowledge is stabilized. So he says, for the jnanis, the Sastras may be useless, but the ajnanis require Sastras. But the objection was from the opponent, which said, you say Jivatma or Paramatma. No, the point here is that Jivatma here are in ignorance. He brings in the aspect of avidya. In this discussion, of course, we have to take up both the epistemology as well as the ontology aspects of the Advaita doctrine. Here the epistemology comes in. The avidya, the reference to avidya is taken up by Acharya as also the resultant upadhi. He says Jivatma in ignorance, in avidya, doesn't understand or doesn't realize that he is Paramatma. He says, I am Krishnan, I am Murali, I am Raman, whatever, and I have this job to be completed. I have to do this duty. I have to complete this duty for my family. I also have to go through the scriptures. I have to attain knowledge. All these efforts are put in by the ajnani who is striving for perfection. Now, he in the process superimposes his body and the mind-intellect equipment, instrument. He superimposes the mind-intellect equipment on the Atma, on the Paramatman. And Paramatma is, of course, also superimposed on the Anatma body, the Anatma mind-intellect equipment. Because of this superimposition, there is this adhyasa of Jivatma, adhyasa on the Jivatma, because of which he is in total ignorance and he doesn't understand that he is the Paramatma. So this point is answered. The pUrvapakshi says, he continues with this objection. In that case, you say there are two types of people with knowledge and people who are in ignorance. These two people cannot be the same because knowledge and ignorance are two opposite attributes. Paramatma, who is devoid of avidya, and Jivatma, who is in avidya, who is in ignorance, cannot be the same. Of course, in the Advaita doctrine, we have that this world is unreal, the world is Mithya, it is not a real world, it is an illusion, it is a superimposition on the Brahman. When you talk about the superimposition topic, we know that Adhyaropa is done on the Brahman, on the Paramatma. The world is superimposed on the Paramatma. Likewise, the superimposition takes place here, and because of which the Jivatma does not understand his real position. Given that situation, as you say, they cannot be they cannot be together. They cannot be one and the same because they have totally different attributes, diametrically opposite attributes. But Shankaracharya here clarifies on a very, very strong technical point. He says this avidya that I am talking about does not belong to the Jivatma. He says avidya is a vidya pratibandha hai, jnana pratibandha hai. It is an obstructor of knowledge. It is not anti-knowledge. It is an obstructor of knowledge, and it has to be present in the same locus, same place where the knowledge emanates from. Knowledge, we all know, emanates from the mind-intellect equipment, and that is the place for the avidya. And this mind-intellect equipment, which belongs to the subtle body, is an anatma. It is a karana, it is an instrument. And vidya is placed in that instrument, and it is not in the jivatma. Being karana nishta, avidya being karana nishta, the jivatma is once again not related to avidya, and thus jivatma and Paramatma aikyam is certainly not only possible, that is the truth. Now, going into the little detail of this avidya, there are three pratyayas of avidya in the karana, in the inner instrument of mind, body, of mind and intellect. Since out of ignorance or on account of ignorance, the Jivatma does not know, it does not comprehend, non-comprehension. Agrahana is the first pratyaya. The second pratyaya is samshaya, doubt. And the third pratyaya is viparita pratyaya, misapprehension. So all the three are present there in the antakarana. Non-perception or agrahana, non-apprehension of the real fact, and partial apprehension. Samshaya is you do realize partly that you are the Paramatma, but not fully. There are technical issues related to that with respect to the bliss aspect of the Paramatma, of the Brahman. We will not get into those details right now. And the third pratyaya is misapprehension. Swami Chinmayananda beautifully puts it as non-apprehension leads to misapprehension. Since he does not realize that he is the Brahman, he is the Paramatma, he thinks that he is Krishnan or Ramesh or anything else. He is a professor, he is a sports person, he is an intellectual. Now all these things are superimposed on Paramatma. So it is essentially that the Jivatma is associated with the Shariratraya, the three bodies, the gross, subtle, and the causal body. Stula, Shoshma, Karana Sharira. When he is associated, when the Jivatma is in association with the three bodies, either of the three bodies, he is a Kshara Purusha, the decaying one. In the chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord talks about two Purushas, very, very categorically and emphatically. He says that there are two Purushas. The one is the Kshara Purusha, the one which decays, which is not permanent, which decays, and which gets into absence subsequently. And the other one is the Akshara Purusha, the one which is eternal, which does not decay, which is there forever. Dvamimo Purushau Loke. This is a very, very clear statement from the Lord. And this Purusha, when he is bereft of the association with the three bodies, Sula, Sushma, Karana, Shariratrayas, he is the Akshara Purusha. He is a Jivatma only as long as he is identifying himself with the three bodies. The moment he ceases this identification, he is the Akshara Purusha, and thus the Akshara and the Shara Purusha are actually the same. Tasmat Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam Siddham. Shankaracharya very emphatically establishes this point that Jivatma and Paramatma are one and the same. In the same breath, of course, Acharya will now talk about the second point, uselessness of the Shastra. Sastras being futile. Acharya has already pointed out that Shastras are required for the ignorant, but not for the Jnanis. And this is so in every philosophy, every doctrine of the Uttarabhyamamsa. Uttarabhyamamsa, we all know, has three major philosophical currents, Advaita, Advaita and Advaita. Given that it is the same in all these philosophies, all these streams, the Jnani in either of these streams do not require Shastras. It is the Ajnani, one who is striving for perfection, who is striving to elevate himself, is the one who resorts to Sastras. So, it is wrong to say that the Shastras are useless. Here, of course, we have to get into the ontology of the Advaita doctrine. The Samsara being Mithya. It's a new coinage. It's a coinage very unique to Advaita doctrine. In the other doctrines, the world is taken as real, and everything in this world is also taken as real. Whereas in Advaita, we don't call it unreal. We do not call it real as well, because the world in Advaita is neither real nor unreal. It is called Mithya, which is inexplicable. Anirvachaniya. It cannot be explained because it is sometimes seemingly real and then we realize that it is not real. Subsequently, we will get into this detail a little later, but right now we have to talk about this particular aspect where we have to address this Shastra Anarthakya Dosha. Acharya here enters into a unique act, which is called Abhyupedyavada, wherein he takes up the position, temporarily of course, he assumes the position of the pUrvapakshi. He says, okay, let us assume that you are right and the world is unreal. Here this pUrvapakshi also jumps around with a lot of other facts related to his doctrine. He says, in our philosophy, the world is real, the bondage is real, bandha hai, moksha hai, both are real. Bondage and liberation are real, and there is action. Since they are real, there is an evident action happening in this world, whereas in your case, the world is unreal, bondage and liberation are also unreal, and hence the Shastras are useless. Anirvishayatvat. There is nothing happening, no point in talking about moksha and bandha because it is unreal in your case. Acharya has already pointed out in our doctrine, it is Mithya. The world is Mithya. We will, as I said, we'll get into the detail subsequently. In the Abhyupedyavada, now the Acharya gets into the same mode as the opponent, as the pUrvapakshi, and he says, okay, let's assume that the bondage and liberation are real. In that case, I would have a couple of questions to ask you. If they are real, do they happen to be placed simultaneously or sequentially? Do they happen simultaneously or sequentially? And the second point, of course, is that do they happen naturally or do they happen on account of some intervention? The first question the Acharya asked was, Kim Purvam, Kim Aparyam, which is the first, bondage or liberation? The second point is that he is asking whether it is on account of some intervention, some nimittatvam, or it happens or occurs naturally, nimittatvam. We'll take the second point first. He says, if it is happening naturally, what is happening? The bondage getting to become liberation. Bondage transforms into liberation. If it happens naturally, bondage transforms into liberation naturally, then naturally again the liberation will also become bondage. So, since the liberation also becomes bondage naturally, because these two attributes or states are happening, they keep happening. One will follow the other, the cycle will go on and on. And if you say that they happen on account of some intervention, in that case, again, it is unnatural. Anything that comes up or happens or occurs on account of any intervention is unnatural and it is ephemeral. It is temporary. It cannot be real. It cannot be there forever. So the second point that Acharya raised has been answered, has been clarified. Now let's get back into the first point where he says, Kim Purvam, Kim Aparyam. Which came first? Which is there? Which occurs first? Bondage or liberation? pUrvapakshi is, of course, very smart here. He says, of course, it is the bondage. Because we are seeking liberation, so we have to be in the state of bondage first, so that the latter part, the subsequent part is liberation, we get liberated. The action happens subsequently. So the initial state is that of bondage. Acharya says, if bondage came first or occurred first, it has to be beginningless, it has to be anadi. And if it is anadi, if it is beginningless, it also has to be endless. It should not have an end. Jatasya dhruvo mrityu. Anything that is born will end. But anything that has been there for eternity, which has not had a beginning, which is anadi, will have no end. It will be ananta, no end for it. Assume, okay, let me also further assume that it does happen. Bondage becomes liberation. Which means we are now in this state of liberation, which has sprung up now, which has had a beginning. So, Jatasya dhruvo mrityu, the beginning, anything that has a beginning will have an end. And this moksha of yours, which you say is real moksha, will also end. And it is no moksha at all. Anil moksha prasanga happens here. So, Acharya says, forget all this. There is a blunder that you have created on account of your stand that these are real, and bondage and liberations happen for real, and the Jivatma moves from the state of bondage to the state of liberation, which means there has been a change of state. Avastha Bheda. And Avastha Bheda, change of state, is not allowed, it is not tenable, because it is against the Sastras. Upanishads point out that Atman, the Paramatma, is nirvikara, it is not subject to any change. So, it being Shastra Viruddham is not tenable at all. So Acharya in this argument has established that the moksha and bandha cannot be real. The pUrvapakshi has to perforce accept that they are not real. Otherwise, he gets into this trouble of avastha bheda for Atma, which is not acceptable, which is not possible, which is against the scriptures. So he has to perforce drop that these are all real. Samsara is real, the ignorance is real, the liberation is real, the bondage is real, and the ignorance is real. All this he has to drop perforce. He's in a fix, but of course he would like to get out of the situation. He springs up and says, in your philosophy also, the world, the samsara is anadi. Like you said, in my case, the bondage is anadi and it has to have an end. Whereas you say that in your doctrine, the samsara is anadi, but it ends with knowledge. How is that possible? Acharya says, in our case, the samsara is a mithya. And nothing ends here. The samsara doesn't end here. It is only negated. He takes the example of the rope and snake, the famous example among the Buddhists as well as the Vedantins. He says, when in the dim light the rope is seen as a serpent, as a snake, it seems real. Yes, the possibility of anybody mistaking the rope for snake exists always, it is anadi. But there is no real snake there. It never existed. It just came up on the mind of the perceiver and it went off. It was negated. It did not end. It was not killed. It was not real at all in the first place. So, it has been negated. Likewise, the world is negated. It doesn't end. It may be anadi, but it doesn't end. It is there. It is on. For every individual, it is negated. The world is negated. For the jnani, it is negated. The jnani has always believed only in the real, only in the Paramatma, only in Brahman, only in the Satya Vastu, not in anything else. Because he knows this samsara will be and is negated. Jnanena bhatitam samsara hai, natu samsarasya vinasha. सर्प बाधित होता है न कि विनाश को प्राप्त करता है. So Acharya says, where is the end for this world which is not real? It is mithya. The problem with the pUrvapakshi is that they have only two sets of situations. Either an object or a thing is real or unreal. There is no third choice there. Whereas in Advaita doctrine, we call it Mithya. Whatever seems real sometimes, but is not really real, it is proved that it is not real subsequently at a later stage. As the snake seemed real in that dim light, till the time the light was put on the snake, when the perceiver realized that it is only a rope and not a snake, till such time the snake was real. Svakale satyavat bhati prabodhe sat asad bhave. Acharya says that in Atma Bodha. He says, as long as it is seen as a snake, it is real. The reaction of the perceiver is also real. He gets frightened. His BP shoots up. He is trying to run away, but he is worried that the snake might follow him. But the moment the light falls on the rope, he realizes, oh, there is no snake here. So, my dear, Acharya says to the pUrvapakshi, Samsara bhadit hota hai. The world is only negated in our case, and it is Mithya. That is why it is negated. Okay, so if it is not real, as you say, again the issue of Sastras being useless comes up. Acharya says, I have already pointed out that it is useful for the Ajnani, the Jivatma, as long as he is in ignorance, or she is in ignorance, they require these Shastras. On account of the change in state, avastha bheda of the Atma, the opponent has to perforce drop the idea that bondage and liberation are real, and he has to accept the Advaita doctrine position that the world is Mithya. So are bondage and liberation. And earlier on, Acharya had already proved that Jiva Paramatma Aikyam is there. It is present. It is the truth. It is there forever. Every Jivatma is a Paramatma. We have all the 4 well-known Mahavakyas. Aham Brahmasmi and Tattvamasi. We have, of course, very many Mahavakyas in the Upanishads. And with this, Acharya emphasizes the most important aspect of the Vedanta, that every soul, every individual is a Paramatma himself. Om Tat Sat. Hari Om.